Hello, my name is Margaret Chen, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I analyze poetry for the Living Writer series. First, I'm going to share with you the different levels that I look at when reading a poem, and then also some things to take into consideration while you're doing your interpretation. I'll also share with you poetic devices that can be helpful in your interpretation. And finally, we'll go through and analyze a poem from one of our living writers in the series, Maya Tevet. When I'm looking at poetry, the first thing I do is I just read the whole thing through. I don't try to analyze it. I just look at it for what it is. So I read through it and try to find the denotation, what the surface meaning is of the poem. Is there a story there? Are there characters? Who is the speaker? What is the conflict, if there's any? Does the conflict get resolved? And then the next thing I do is look at the style of the poem. Knowing the style of the poem can really inform the reader how the author wants you to feel or think about the poem. So, for example, if the author writes a sonnet, they are probably wanting you to look for themes of love and passion and beauty. But if they're writing an elegy, they're going to be dealing with themes of loss, desire for a loved one to come back, or grief in general. And it's very easy to find out what a poetic form is. You don't have to memorize all the different types of poems. If you just go onto your search engine and type in what is a poem with 14 lines and two stanzas, then you can get a lot of examples and use that to identify, okay, this is what style of poem is, and these are the themes often associated with that type of poem. Another thing that I look at is their rhyme scheme? What's the mood that's created by the words in the poem? What are the poetic devices that are utilized? And poetic devices are tools that an author can use in order to pack a big punch or really emphasize something in a small space. So I'll give you a list of poetic devices coming up, and then we'll go through and identify some of them with the poem that we'll be reading today. The next thing I do is I look at the connotation. So, what's the abstract meaning or the feeling created the by the words or the group of words or the entire poem? Are there a lot of negative words in there? Are there a lot of love language words? So you may have a sonnet that has the speaker saying, I look up at the night sky and the stars are as infinite as your eyes, or they're as lovely as your eyes, or the stars are like my love for you. So we get the denotation, the speaker's looking up at the sky, they're seeing the stars, and they're thinking of the person they love. The connotation would be they are comparing the stars to how infinite their love is, and they're going to love the person forever. So the deeper abstract meaning is like the stars, my love is infinite. Another thing I look for is repetition. The poetic form is very short. So when an author takes the time to repeat something, then that's a big hint that that's something you should pay attention to. Are there the same type of colors that come up over and over again? Is there a specific nature theme? You know, are there branches and ivies and birds that are singing throughout the poem? Are there a lot of feelings, the same type of feeling repeated multiple times in the poem? Some things to consider during your analysis is that a poem can be a complete story. We have the free verse, which is becoming more common now. And part of that free verse can be a narrative poem. So more similar to the fiction that we're used to reading, but in a much shorter space. We also have something like the epic, like Beowulf, which many people are familiar with. We typically read that within our first 2 years of university, and that has a whole story, but it is a poem. But a poem can also capture just a brief moment in time or a fleeting emotion, or even an emotion that lingers beyond reading the poem. Another thing to keep in mind is that the speaker is usually not the same as the author. A lot of people confuse the speaker with the author if the speaker is speaking in the first person, but just like any character, the speaker is a tool used to convey the theme or the message of the poem. It can be a reflection of the author or a reflection of the aspect of the author, but the speaker can also be something that is not related to the author at all, and instead more like a character that someone would make up in a novel. And I think the most important thing to consider about poetry is that it can be interpreted in numerous ways. Everybody brings their own life experiences to a poem, and as long as you can back up your interpretation with quotes from your poem that you're looking at, then your interpretation is completely valid. It is very likely that the author's own interpretation of their poem is different, possibly similar, but different than the majority of the readers that read the poem. And I think that's another beautiful thing about poetry versus narrative fiction is the poetry allows the reader to reflect on the themes and see how it applies to them. And so everybody can be kind of like a piece of the story of the poem. So here are a list of poetic devices. You can go ahead and pause it and take notes on it at some point in time or screenshot it. I won't go through all of them, but these are some common poetic devices. And I will go over the definitions of some of them as we're doing our analysis. The poem that we're going to be looking at today is called Alternate Life by Maya Tevet Dayan, and from her collection Wherever We Float, That's Home, translated by Jane Medved. So first things first, we are going to read the poem without thinking about poetic form, poetic devices, connotation. We're just going to read it as it is. In my alternate life, I am that young girl opposite me on the ferry deck, wrapped in a blue coat. The fur on the brim of my hat hides my eyes. The boy who came out on the deck with me is trying to light his cigarette in the wind. In my alternative life, this is me. Edging closer to him now, one warm breath away, cupping the flame that flares and dies out, guarding it from the wind with two fearless hands. It's the beginning of November, but I'm not cold. Hot blood erupts in my body like a geyser, rises through my long, strong legs to my head, flung from the earth's lava, boiling. The boy sends me a look. His smile is now an offering for me alone. Private, secret, like a crack of possibility. The edges of his hat touch the fur of my coat. Between us, the cigarette burns. So that's an absolutely lovely poem. So what's the denotation? What is the story of this poem? We have three characters. We have the speaker, we have the girl, and we have the boy. The speaker is looking at this young couple, imagining that she is this young girl. They're all riding the ferry. It's cold outside. The boy is trying to light a cigarette, but no matter how hard he tries, the wind always blows out the flame. Once the girl helps him by protecting the flame with her hands, he's able to successfully light the cigarette. And then they meet in a sort of embrace, and the cigarette continues to burn. So that's the denotation. That's the basic story of the poem. Kind of boring if you think about it, like, oh, great, you're riding a ferry and there's two kids and they're trying to smoke. Yeah. Okay. So what? So, if we just stop there, not so great. So let's look at the poetic devices and the style of the poem. So this is a free verse poem. It doesn't have any rhyme scheme. There's no ABAB. I tried going through and doing the, ABCD to match up, and every single line was different. So it wasn't even worth putting up on the screen. There's no rhyme scheme. There's no meter. However, this is can be interpreted as a lyric. So a lyric is kind of like how you would think of lyrical, like music. So it does have its own little rhythm to it, but it's more like a song. And lyrics are known for taking emotions or moments in time and capturing them, elevating them, and now they kind of exist outside of all time. So when we read this poem, we can think about, this is something that like a picture in a scrapbook. It's going to last forever. It's that moment in time captured. Now, in order to get to the connotation of the poem, let's also look at the poetic devices I've highlighted here. So we get the metaphors. The speaker says, I am that young girl. She is comparing herself explicitly to something or someone by stating that she is that something or someone. So we have the metaphor of the speaker becoming the young girl. We also have the metaphor of the smile that is offered to the young girl, where on line 15, his smile is now an offering. It's not like an offering. His smile becomes the offering. It's more powerful. So if it was like an offering, it's like, oh, okay, well, thanks for the apple, versus his smile is an offering. It's something that's like, if you think about, the Bible, when they make an offering of, for their sins or something, it's something that's from deep within. It is more powerful than just like, oh, here's a present. That's for you. That's nice. No, it is a part of them that is now given to something else. So his smile is an offering to the girl. And then part of the metaphors we have are the similes. So we have his offering, the metaphor is like a crack of possibility. So we get the simile. Simile is like a comparison, like as. We have on line 13, hot blood erupts in my body. So the hot blood erupting, that could be a metaphor. But it's like a geyser. And it rises up. It goes through her entire body. It doesn't just stay still. It rises up like a geyser up through her whole being. A couple things that I also wanted to point out is the anaphora. So on line 4 and 5, right here, we have the repeated. And this is so tiny. It could be so easy to ignore this. But we have the fur on the brim of my hat and the boy who came out on the deck. And it seems so insignificant. But we're at the beginning of the poem and we notice that these two lovers, they're separate right now. They are not together. They're doing their own thing. But by the end of it, we have, and we'll look at this more on the next slide, but we have the edges of his hat touch the fur on my coat. So they go from being, separate entities over here to being together. Another thing that I want you to be able to look at is the end stop versus enjambment. So end stop just means that there is some sort of punctuation at the end of a line in order to slow the reader down, to stop the reader. Versus enjambment, there is nothing there. So it forces the reader to continue on and to the next line in order to complete the thought. It gives a sense of urgency. It can make things speed up to build anticipation or to emphasize that particular theme. So, like if we look over here, we say on line 7, in my alternative life, this is me edging closer to him now. There's some sort of urgency to her desire of wanting to get closer. She's edging, so it's slow. So edging, that kind of creeping towards, but she's going quickly. This is me. I want to get closer to this person. And then we get the end stop. One warm breath away, cupping the flame that flares and dies out. So that's more intentional. It's slower. So now she's gotten closer and now she lingers. And then we also have on these highlights here, caesuras. So that is just when there is a punctuation within the line in order to stop, to slow down. This is something that is very common. If you've read Beowulf, just about every line, that style, there's a big pause in the middle. It creates a sort of rhythm, but it can also be used to make the reader stop and think about what's happening there. It's like we get over here on line 16 and 17. So his smile is now offering for me alone, private, secret, like a crack of possibility. So we get the caesuras, and then we get pushed along with the enjambment to the next lines. But for just a moment, we're, as the reader, trapped within that offering of a smile. We stop and there it is. It's private, secret. We're stuck there in the gaze of the smile. And then just a couple other things. We have a brief personification of the hands. Hands are not capable of being fearless because hands don't have emotions. But here they are fearless hands. They're fighting against the cold to light that flame. And then we have the extended metaphor. An extended metaphor just means it's a metaphor that goes throughout the whole poem, multiple lines. It kind of ties everything together. And we have the metaphor of the cigarette, trying to light the cigarette with the flame and the heat. Now let's talk about connotation, which we already kind of talked about this. I find it difficult not to think about connotation when I'm looking at the poetic devices, because I'm going through and I'm thinking, okay, why is this here? What's the purpose of this poetic device? So a lot of the poetic devices in here create kind of like a moody, nostalgic, but at the same time, a very passionate mood. So we get the moodiness through the weather. It's cold, it's winter. And here I've highlighted in blue kind of the cold versus in the orange, we have the warm, the heat imagery. So cold versus the heat. And in the cold, we're moody, we're within ourselves. It's November, it's burr, and they have to be wrapped in fur and have a hat on to keep out the cold. And it's nostalgic. Very quickly, it can be easy to forget that the speaker is not the young girl, but rather is probably an older woman looking at the young girl. And why is she caring about what this young girl is doing? What is the purpose of her saying this is her alternate life? This is how she could have been. So maybe she's desiring to relive the past. Maybe she's lost something and she's trying to take vicariously recapture that. So it's kind of nostalgic because, in a way, even though she's looking at the girl, she's looking into the past. And throughout the poem, we get this imagery of the lovers, the girl and the boy, who are fighting against the cold. So the girl is wrapped in her coat. The boy is trying to light a cigarette, but the wind keeps taking out the flame. And the flame and the cigarette kind of become symbols for their passion and their desire. So it is when they're separate, when they are not working together, when they don't have passion for each other, it doesn't work. So the boy came out on the deck with me, is trying to light his cigarette in the wind. So he's trying to, he can't do it. But now the girl, she is edging closer to him. That passion is igniting. She's one warm breath away. So when we think about warm breath, when it's so cold, it's snowing, your breath is literally turning to ice. You have to be really, really close to each other in order to feel that warmth. And then she takes her hands and cups the flame. She cradles that passion in her hand, and the wind tries to take out the flame, and it flickers and it may die out, but once again they try. And just the intimacy of this imagery we're seeing of two people close together, probably face to face, with her hands cupping essentially his face because the cigarette goes in the mouth. So her hands are on his face. All of a sudden, the speaker, imagining herself as the young girl, is no longer cold. She has hot blood erupting in her. That passion has been ignited and goes through her whole body, that she feels like it's lava, and the November winter air does not affect her at all. So over here, finally, the edges of his hat touch the fur of my coat. They're now in an embrace, and the cigarette is burning. He no longer needs her to be cupping her hands around his face to allow the flame to light the cigarette. It's already done. The flame has been lit. It's now a smoldering passion that lasts between the two. So we see a lot of these themes. We have desire, longing to relive the past, maybe because she wants to make a different choice. Maybe she wants to be like those passionate lovers, or maybe she wants to recapture her youth. And now putting it all together. So how I interpret this poem is that it's about the desire to escape into the past, to have a life of passion, maybe make different choices. Perhaps the speaker is an older woman who has lost her lover, either through a breakup, or maybe he died, or it's very possible that, she is married or in a relationship, and they just go home and turn the TV on every night, and there's no passion anymore. And she sees those two young presumably lovers and think, I wish that I still had that passion burning in me with my lover. And so this poem takes place in very cold November, maybe in Northern Territory. And we know it's icy and probably even snowy because the girl is bundled in a coat with fur and the boy's wearing the hat to keep off the chill. It's so windy, he can't light his cigarette. And so therefore the cold, if the cigarette is symbolic of passion, then the cold becomes a metaphor for the coldness that can enter into a relationship and snuff out the flames of passion. So, on his own, the boy cannot keep the literal and symbolic flame alive. It requires the woman to guard it, to protect it from outside forces, and to keep it burning, smoldering between the two of them. So the power of their passion is so great that it ends up defying the elements, and the metaphorical cigarette of smoldering passion becomes lit. And that heat from the passion transcends the cigarette, transcends the flame, and enters the body itself, allowing the body to defy the elements and beat the cold November air. So, in the end, the act of the boy trying to ignite the flame and the girl assisting him in keeping that flame alive results in bringing the two very close together in a semi embrace, where the cigarette, representing their passion, smolders between them. It's something that's going to keep on burning. But another thing to keep in mind, this may be the end of the story for the poem, but why a cigarette? Why not, pick something else, like maybe in a different area with a campfire or something on the northern shore? Why on a boat? Why on a cigarette? And something that you could think about, oh, well, cigarettes, they burn out too. And what happens? Either you replace that cigarette, or once the cigarette's gone, it's gone. Does that mean once that passion smoldering burns away, it's no longer there? And then maybe that young girl ends up becoming the woman in the future, writing another fairy, looking at another young couple, wishing she had that passion too. So overall, a very lovely poem. If you just look at the surface meaning, kind of boring, but then once you get into the form and the poetic devices, it could be kind of fun to pick out what is the story behind these characters, and what could that mean to you as the reader, and what can you take away from that. So I hope that you have enjoyed this analysis and you have found it very useful, and that perhaps you can use some of these techniques in the future. Thank you.